Before we begin our debate, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement on behalf of all of us here. We do acknowledge that the lands of the Long Range Mountains are situated in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect and the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, the Mi'kmaq, the Innu, and the Inuit. And we ask that you take a moment to think about that from where you're joining us here this evening. This debate is part of the National Coordinated 100 Debates on the Environment. It's supported by the national organization known as GreenPAC, and there are approximately 100 environment debates happening across the country. They're actually happening today and tomorrow. I know that some of the candidates have shared that some of their colleagues are participating in this type of debate elsewhere in the country as well. All of these debates are strictly nonpartisan and they are politically neutral. I'd like to give a shout out to our organizer here this evening, the Western Environment Center, who is the organizer of this local event in Long Range Mountains. And the Western Environment Center is a local community group whose mandate is environmental and education. So this makes perfect sense for them. And their main focus areas are food sustainability, climate change, and they do many hands-on projects in our community. Some of you may be familiar with some of their community gardens, looking at community composting in the region. They organize multiple events. Some of you may have attended the Green Drink Speaker Series, and they also get involved in policy and public discussion on key environmental issues in our region and across the province. So if you want more information about our hosts here this evening, the Western Environment Center can be found at wecnl.ca, that's WECNL.ca. I'd like to briefly introduce the two candidates who have given us their valuable time during this short campaign, and especially on this quick turnaround as we try to organize this tonight. 3 candidates were invited to participate in the debate, and 2 have accepted our invitation and have joined us here this evening. We're happy to welcome Kayla Minst from the Democratic Party and Goody Hutchings with the Liberal Party. Carol Anstey with the Conservative Party has declined participation in this evening's debate. Before I begin, I'm going to briefly review the format of the event. And we have gone over this with the candidates, but I'd certainly like to let all of you that are joining us here this evening understand how this is going to flow tonight. So as you can see, the 3 of us are here on screen with you, and we are going to be going through a series of questions with the candidates. We're going to have 1-minute introductions in just a moment by each candidate, and we have 8 questions this evening that we're going to be putting to these candidates. The first 5 of these questions are preset by the national coordinators of the 100 debates. So these are questions that are being asked across the country. And the last 3 questions have been created by the Western Environment Center Committee. And they really take into, the local issues and any concerns that seem to be relevant based on the interaction that WEC has had with the community. At the end of these questions, we are going to make a Q&A available. So you're not seeing this at this moment, but when we get to that point, I'll give you some more instructions at that time as well, that the Q&A will open and you can answer in as a viewer a question into the Q&A section, and we will have a behind the scenes team who's going to quickly run through those questions and choose as many questions as we can in the time allotted. We do ask that you make it a concise question, obviously respectful question, and if possible, we would ask that you bring up a new topic that maybe has not been asked and discussed earlier in the debate. Each candidate will have an opportunity to respond with 3 minutes. There will be a wildcard option. So this is a debate. If they choose, this is totally at the candidate's discretion, they can use a rebuttal. And they're simply going to raise their hand and indicate to me that they'd like to answer once again. We're going to be going back and forth between the candidates. And then as they answer, the other candidate will answer. And again, it's up to them. They've only got 2 out of 8. But if they want to do a bit of a rebuttal, they certainly are welcome to do so, and they'll indicate that to me, and we will make that happen. After we get through the gamut of the 8 questions and the rebuttals and all of those pieces, then they will have their own closing remarks. All the responses are going to be timed, so we do have a very strict timing, which I'm probably way over time already. I've got my timer there in the background. And they're going to let me know when we get down to a certain point. And when we get to 30 seconds left, I'm going to be raising a yellow card, and that will let the candidate know that they have 30 seconds. And when they get down to 10 seconds, then I'll be raising a red card, and we will get them to clue up in that 10 seconds. We are going to keep our timing fairly tight. We do promise to have you out this evening by 8:30 Newfoundland Daylight Time. So that's our 90 minutes. And so we are going to get ready. So randomly, I believe that Ms. Hutchings, Goody, you've been chosen to do your open introduction.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. Good evening, everyone. My name is Goody Hutchings, and I'm the Liberal candidate for the 2021 federal election. I was first elected member of Parliament in 2015, and I've spent the last 6 years working for the people in the Long Range Mountains through each of its 200 plus communities. Thanks so much for the invitation to participate today, and I'm delighted to be here with Kayla Mintz, the riding's NDP candidate, and we all know that the involvement of women in our political life is extremely important. Everyone benefits when more women and diverse folks engage in issues and efforts. The Western Environment Centre does incredible work around Western Newfoundland. I hear people talking about the gardens, the composting, and the foraging clinics you've spearheaded. It's very impressive, and you do a great job of bringing communities and individuals together. We all know that climate change is one of the most significant issues facing humanity, and it's a global issue, made real by pollution and greenhouse gas emissions over generations. And the effects of climate change are visible right here in our own communities. Rising sea level and coastal erosion is something I hear about all the time when traveling in the Long Range Mountains. Local infrastructure is at risk as storms continue to become stronger and sea levels rise. The ocean's temperature changes are impacting our marine life, and climate change is impacting our wildlife and our agricultural sector. Climate change affects every person and every single industry: fishing, agriculture, forestry, mining, tourism, and sadly, some still deny its reality and its severity. Climate change is real, and it is impacting us every day. It impacts our homes, our food security, our work, our way of life, and it will continue to do so until each and every one of us in every party, in every community, we all need to take steps to ease the tide on climate change and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Kayla, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Kayla Mintz, and I'm the NDP candidate for Long Range Mountains. Thank you also to the Western Environment Centre. And I'll echo what Goody has said. Goody, it's great to be here with you. I agree. It's wonderful to have a strong female presence in this debate and in this riding. I'm really pleased to be here tonight to debate these issues. The climate crisis is the biggest challenge facing our planet, especially my generation and the generation below me. It's up to us to solve it so that we can enjoy our way of life in the Long Range Mountains and across the province. You know, I love hiking in Gross Mourne in our beautiful backyard. We have to be able to do that without risk of further degradation. We need our wildlife to be able to live sustainably in their natural habitat. And I want to be able to go on a bike ride without a constant threat of hurricanes and other adverse climate events. In order to fight for you as your MP, I commit to tackling environmental challenges at a systemic level. So many of us do our part as individuals, and we're all here tonight for that reason. Though we're tired of seeing big corporations let off the hook for environmental destruction. We're tired of a lack of concrete action by successive and conservative and liberal governments. Indeed, I'd say the Liberals have had 6 years to fulfill their promises, but instead of concrete action, Canada now has the highest greenhouse gas emissions growth in the G7. To truly protect our environment, we need to wind down our reliance on fossil fuels. It really is the most important thing we can do, but it also can't be done at the expense of jobs. I'm proud to be part of a party that will fight climate destruction while building a new economy that's based on employment and workers' rights. I think here in this province, there's a lot of exciting and creative ideas, and I'm looking forward to getting into some of them about how we can make that change. And to sum up, we can't ignore the climate emergency any longer. We know it's real. Future generations are depending on us and our leadership, and that's why I'm running to be that change.
Excellent. Thank you, ladies. Appreciate you giving us a sense of who you are as we open up. So we are going to move into our 8 questions that we have preset based on, as I mentioned earlier, from the federal organization, as well as some local questions. We would like to know what you, if elected MP, would do to help to solve these environmental challenges. We're looking for you tonight in this conversation to go beyond simply stating what your party has done or will do. At least in your initial approaches, we would ask that you avoid talking about what the other parties are or are not doing. We're really looking to hear from your perspective what you would do if elected MP in the region. Sound fair? Okay. So Kayla, you ended off there, so I'm going to go to you first. And so the question is to both of you, but Kayla, you'll have the first opportunity to respond. So COVID-19 has brought to light the links between the climate crisis, the human impact on nature, and the rise of global pandemics. As we move from response to recovery, please hope we're in the recovery stage, how will you commit to a green and just pandemic recovery plan that also ensures we meet our climate targets?
Thank you, Carol. Absolutely. The pandemic has really put into sharp relief the inequities that are in our society and the real environmental crisis that we're facing. I believe that environmental and economic justice must go hand in hand. So for me, I'm committed to a pandemic recovery which prioritizes both. So prioritizing the needs of workers, addressing inequities at home, and also upholding Indigenous rights, which are so key. I think we've seen that there's creative ways to develop new jobs that are green and that are creative and that will improve life for working people in this province. There are things like investments in the tech sector, infrastructure for electric vehicles, and responsible green tourism. Personally, I'm committed to hearing more about these smart ideas across Western Newfoundland and working with communities and working with business and working with stakeholders to find ways to implement them. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Goody.
Thank you, Kayla. And thank you, Carol. That is so true. We have just gone through 20 months that none of us ever knew was around. There's no playbook written on a pandemic. And certainly we also saw how climate was impacted and how impacted our daily lives as well. So our Liberal government already has committed to and funded a green and recovery plan. In fact, we launched a $53.6 billion green recovery climate action funding just this year. And as a result of that, nearly 1 million jobs have been restored or created. But we need to think beyond that. We need to think locally as well. We need to explore on the potential of our forest industry to promote that green economy, new bioproducts from the forest industry to reduce the use of plastics, new building designs using wood and to conserve energy and limit emissions. We need to use our forest and enhance silviculture to sequester carbon. These activities will create job opportunities for all and many women and diverse and marginalized groups as well. We've also committed to reintroducing 2 bills that will seek to address the impacts on marginalized groups. A bill on the environmental justice that will require the Minister of Environment and Climate Change to examine the link between race, socioeconomic status, and the exposure to the environmental risk and to develop a strategy to address environmental justice. And legislation to strengthen CEPA, which is the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, including recognizing the right to a healthy environment for the first time in a federal law. It's sad when you have to say that's the first time in a federal law. And by working with the people on the ground, we have some great groups doing some phenomenal work. We need to encourage them to think outside the box here in the Long Range Mountains and do even more. There's Atlantic Healthy and Oceans Initiatives. WEC does some phenomenal work. There are incredible groups out there from every sector, and we need to work together, think outside the box to make this better for the Long Range Mountains.
Excellent, thank you. When I saw this question, this brought me back to flashbacks because we're talking about SARS and Ebola. I happened to be living in Ontario when SARS first emerged in Toronto, so that brought me right back. But like SARS and Ebola and nearly 3/4 of infectious diseases, scientists are generally agreeing that COVID originated in other animal species. It spread to human in large part because of the pressures on these species brought on by land use changes, unsustainable consumption. These factors are leading causes of climate crisis. That I don't think is surprising. Given Canada's commitment to protect 30% of land, fresh water, and ocean by 2030, how will you develop a new and credible plan to halt and reverse nature loss and protect species at risk? Goody, I'll go to you first.
Thanks, Carol. Our Liberal government has made a commitment to sustain our natural habitats, and I will strongly support these efforts. As you know, Carol, I'm a big outdoor person myself. We have to protect our natural systems if we're going to ensure the well being and economic security of all our citizens. When we came into government in 2015, this is sad. Canada had protected less than 1% of marine areas. We're now at 14%. And we've got an ambitious plan to do more. We're going to establish 10 new national parks and 10 national marine conservation areas. And there's work ongoing now to create the first marine conservation area in the island of Newfoundland here in the Long Range Mountains. I'm so excited about that. That is going to truly make a difference for that community. In the December 2020 document presented by then Environment Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, A Healthy Environment and a Healthy Economy, the commitment to conserve and protect 25% of Canada's land and 25% of oceans by 2025, working towards 30% by 2030 was reaffirmed. And we've said that a re-elected Liberal government will ground these efforts in science, grounded in Indigenous knowledge, and grounded in local perspectives. However, I'm not going to support conservation efforts that establish protected areas at the expense of our Indigenous peoples and our traditional land use. The historic land uses throughout our province and country has to be responsibly taken into consideration when we determine protected areas, and this can only be done if we all work together. Education is also critical to ensuring that everyone understands the importance of our natural resources, the importance on climate change, greenhouses in schools, the popularity of WEC-owned community gardens have made great strides in educating our youth about the importance of the environment around us. We're committed to the 30% by 2030 target, and we have a proven track record on nature protection to get us there. Achieving this target is critical in stopping the rapid declines we've seen in the biodiversity. We need our animals, our wildlife, our marine life, everything to have a healthy home, and we're all going to work together to do that. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you. Ms. Kayla.
Thank you. Absolutely. There is a real need that all of these successive crises from SARS and Ebola to COVID have shown that we're not doing enough. And unfortunately, we can't just talk. We need to actually take action. Liberal plans have not really shown us any results. And I think, we look at something like Muskrat Falls, we talk about consultation. That's just not happened with the Innu and new deals that just get forced upon. So my approach will be to listen to different various stakeholders in the province and across the country, and to hear what people are saying, and then in contrast to Liberals and the Conservatives before them, to take action. From the NDP's side, our plan is to reverse nature loss. Our plan to reverse nature loss is fully grounded in our commitment to safeguard ecosystems and biodiversity by protecting 30% of our land, freshwater, and oceans by 2030. Personally, I support protecting and expanding those national parks, ensuring that the Species at Risk Act is enforced, and we need to make sure there's enough resources to actually enforce it. We have a very vast province, and it's important that we have the resources in place to be able to do that. Other areas where we're going to be looking at are to further protect oceans and our freshwater, is to look at reducing emissions from shipping and from fishing. As Goody mentioned, expanding marine protected areas is also critical, and then reducing threats to ocean ecosystems and looking at a national freshwater strategy. But unlike the Liberals, we're going to actually take action on that on a priority basis.
Okay, thank you. All right, on to our third question. Both of you have actually mentioned the significant impacts to women and other marginalized groups. We have seen that they are impacted differently in a crisis. Kayla, what would you do to address these groups that have been disproportionately affected by both the pandemic and our environmental crises?
Thanks, Carol. Absolutely. It's undeniable that the effects of the climate crisis and pollution disproportionately put strain on women and marginalized communities. For myself, for the past 7 years, I have worked side by side with activists focused on ending impunity for sexual assault. That's what I do for my work. So like many of you here tonight, I understand the need to work very closely, advocates with elected officials to bring about change. So I'll bring that experience from my career to the fight for climate justice and commit to addressing all the severe inequities that have been made worse by the pandemic. As a New Democrat, I fight to ensure that any climate investments we make also reduce inequality. another priority for me is to honor Indigenous rights and support communities that have been left behind by liberal and conservative governments. The New Democrats are committed to creating an Office of Environmental Justice to address the impacts of pollution and the loss of biodiversity on low-income, racialized, and other marginalized communities. So I really do think in partnership, we can find ways to address the inequalities that we've seen.
Thank you. Ms. Goody.
Thanks, Carol. Climate change is a global reality, and our policies have been created by and for a diverse range of people and needs. And according to the UN Development Program, 80% of people displaced by climate change are women. That's terrible. Our liberal activities, especially with our Green and Just Recovery Plan, will create job opportunities for many women and marginalized groups. We almost promote the awareness and incentives to encourage women to enter the green economy workforce. Right here in the Long Range Mountains, women's roles with natural resources are growing. Fishing enterprises. I think of Trixie down in Port-au-Port. She's a proud female owner of her fishing enterprise. I think of the female fish processors, the forestry industry. I know some phenomenal women in that. The potential for employment in the green economy is astronomical, but it's just not about creating jobs for women and marginalized groups. We have to ensure that these jobs are sustainable and well paid. And in the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and math, efforts by your Liberal government are bringing more diverse people and women into science and research and development. And these opportunities have led to advances, and they'll contribute to a greener economy for all of us. And our Women's Entrepreneur Fund is another great example of helping women succeed in this area. And we have an Indigenous women's program with small business owners in the Indigenous world just doing wonderful things here in the Long Range Mountains. And every single aspect of our current Liberal platform has been closely reviewed with a gender and diverse lens. And every single one of our policies have a gender lens also. And women and gender equality, I've been proud and pleased and privileged to be the parliamentary secretary for that since 2019. And the women's work increased leading up to the pandemic, but COVID caused the increase to plummet. Our new $10 a day childcare is going to make a huge difference in women's ability to return to work. Women and gender equality funding to women's centers to support the great work that they do was first out the door in the pandemic. We didn't wait for associations and groups to apply. It was sent out because we needed them to continue the great work they're doing. The Liberal Party, we were the first gender-based cabinet appointed in 2015. My Lord, that sounds so bad. And the first wage ministry. And in budget 2021, we added over $600 million in programming to help women and gender equality programs get up and off the ground. We're finally working on a national action plan to end gender-based violence. Sadly, it was in January just past of this year that it finally took all 10 provinces and 3 territories to get together to say, yes, we're going to work hard to address this. We've come a long way. We've accomplished a lot, but yes, there's more to do.
Thank you. Goody, I believe you mentioned this act earlier when you were talking the CEPA, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. So for benefit of our viewers, this act is our overarching law to protect the health and environment of Canadians. The act has not been significantly amended since 1999. I believe, Goody, you mentioned that earlier, despite major changes in our understanding of toxic substances in our environment. A recent bill introduced in the last parliament did not make it past the first reading. So Goody, if you were elected MP, what actions will you take to support getting this bill reintroduced, strengthened, and made a top legislative priority?
Carol, I appreciate this important question so much. And I think Kayla and I will both agree how important it is to get this done. I wish our other candidate was here to give us their opinion of their parties on this. Our government was so pleased to introduce the bill, but as you said, Carol, it didn't pass. I will absolutely pass to have CEPA modernized, have it introduced, and I'll also press for it early and quick passage. And I welcome other ideas to strengthen the bill. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act is the foundation for environmental protection in Canada. It's used to address all forms of pollution, including addressing plastic pollution. That's another area our Liberals have shown strong leadership in by banning harmful single-use plastics, ensuring producers are more responsible for their packaging waste, and requiring increased recycling content in packaging. Toxins in the environment is a national concern, and I strongly support efforts to improve legislation that better regulate these toxic substances. We're talking about heavy metals, benzene, PCBs, pesticides, and dioxins. They all pose high risks to all our citizens and our pets. Specifically, I support an act that ensures the right to know what products contain what substances. Given what's happening in our oceans and land-based, this act should include specific guidelines and limitation on the use and, more importantly, the disposal of plastics. A re-elected Liberal government will pass a strengthened Canadian Environmental Protection Act to protect everyone, including people most vulnerable to harm from toxic substances and those communities that are exposed to where exposure is high. We've promised zero plastic waste by 2030. And only 9% of the plastics that we use are recycled, and tons of plastics worth billions are being thrown away into landfills. We must make sure we take every opportunity. We've all seen incredible places in the world that make great items for household use, for daily use out of recycled plastics. We talk about other small businesses that we can grow here. There's a huge opportunity here that. We're also committed to requiring that consumer products, such as cosmetics and cleaning products, give people the information they need to know what's in it. We'll move forward next spring with mandatory requirements on that too if we're reelected. We're committed to full review of legislation governing the use of all pesticides. And we'll also introduce legislation to phase out toxicity testing on animals. But we need to educate and encourage our citizens too. We all need legislation, yes, but we still have people littering garbage, throwing garbage in the woods or on the side of the road. That's going to slow down our progress. Frankly, I see far too much of it during my travels around the Long Range Mountains. We have to do better with that. Education will help. What WEC is doing is help, but we all need to educate more. Start young to realize that you just can't throw stuff out the window. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kayla.
Thank you. I do agree with Goody that we do need to strengthen the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. But I want to raise the question, why hasn't it been passed? That's because we have an election right now that no one needed. The NDP was working with the Liberal government on this, and there was no need for this unnecessary election. The bill was introduced in April, and just a few months later, we called an election, and so the bill died. So I think that just points out that, there are a lot of good promises, but there was a lot more we could have done working together, and that just wasn't possible. So I would like to consider that we should change and think about making different choices so that we can have different results. Putting that aside, New Democrats are committed to strengthening CEPA and improving on Bill C-28 to better protect Canadians from toxic substances. New Democrats are also looking to toughen the federal environmental impact assessment process for new coal mines and mine expansions. And I think it's really key. It's true, we need to do more education and individuals focusing is important, but really we need to look at getting tough on big polluters. I will focus on creating good jobs for workers that also support our environmental goals, such as cleaning up environmental hazards. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to remind our candidates, if you wish to use a rebuttal at any time, you just need to raise your hand and let me know, and we can incorporate that in as well. Ms. Kayla, you mentioned Indigenous folks earlier in one of your answers, and I know I keep saying Ms. Kayla and Ms. Goody. I don't know, it's something I've always done. I think it goes back to daycare days where you always refer to someone as Miss So-and-so. I don't mean this in any particular way. It's just a habit, I think. But Kayla, you did mention Indigenous people earlier, and I think all would agree that they play a critical role in environmental solutions. How will you approach, if elected, how will you approach implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission?
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. I am fully committed to the implementation of what we call UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the 94 calls to action on the Commission. In my past life, I worked at Global Affairs Canada in Ottawa, and I was representing Canada abroad. And little known fact, I was part of the behind the scenes movement within the bureaucracy to push Canada to finally commit to UNDRIP. It really shouldn't have taken so long. It was quite embarrassing. And I'm pleased to be elected and to be able to push forward the implementation of UNDRIP. Indigenous peoples are best placed to protect cultural and ecological diversity through control of their territory. I support upholding Indigenous rights to protect lands, waterways, biodiversity through working directly with Indigenous governments. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people should be full and equal partners in Canadian efforts to create a low carbon future. This includes encouraging energy sustainability in remote communities and supporting equity opportunities for renewable energy projects. It also includes supporting Indigenous-led nature conservation, land use, and climate planning. Any development that is proposed will be based on the government's duty to consult and will ensure that there's free, prior, and informed consent, unlike what we're seeing with the current Liberal government. In some, Indigenous peoples must be central in decision-making roles to help direct Canada's efforts to confront the climate crisis. New Democrats are 100% committed to making reconciliation central in our plan to address the environmental crisis.
Thank you. Ms. Goody.
And Miss Carol, I think that's stuck now. Thank you, Miss Carol. I agree with Kayla. You know, Indigenous people have been stewards of these lands and waters since time, and they have a deep knowledge and understanding of land management. We can all learn so much from them. And our government did pass the Act, the UNDRIP Act, earlier this year, plus its 94 calls of action, and I support that declaration 100%. In terms of implementation, I'll commit to work, and I will continue to work with Indigenous communities to help align our local interest. We need their help in land use planning, protected areas. How do we look after our marine coastal areas, all within the declaration's framework. With the launch of the Indigenous Guardians program in 2017, our government helped establish Canada's first ever Indigenous protected and conserved area. And I do know that the Indigenous Guardians program has worked well here at home. A re-elected Liberal government will take a whole of government approach to UNDRIP by including it in every cabinet minister's mandate letter, as we do with a gender-based lens. And a Liberal government will work with all the First Nations, Inuit, Métis partners to support a new Indigenous Guardians program and establish a new Indigenous Guardians network. To date, we have work ongoing in over 52 Indigenous conserved and protected areas. And in Budget 21, we committed another $340 million in additional funding to support Indigenous leadership in nature conservation to achieve our 30% protection goal and achieve partnerships with Indigenous peoples.
Thank you. So that brings us through the questions that are at the national level. And so these questions are, as mentioned earlier, this is part of 100 debates on the environment. So these questions are being asked across Canada. The next three questions that I have for you have been developed by the Western Environmental Centre Committee. So they're a little bit more local to home. Certainly, climate crisis is not just here in our local region. So keeping in mind that this is national that we're looking at, but these have a little bit more of a slant on sort of local issues that WEC has come up across in their research and talking to their communities. So I will go to Goody just finished off. So in the next question is up to you first. In light of the most recent IPCC report as a code red for humanity, there has been an increased pressure for the global community to begin ramping down oil and gas production, as well as put a halt to any new exploration and an end to subsidies. I feel a bit like a reporter here. I'm going to sneak in a bunch of questions. So this is a multi-part question. I know that goes against all rules, but this is a multi-part question. I'm going to give you that heads up. So given Newfoundland and Labrador's recent economic reliance on oil and gas production, one, how will you approach potential new exploration and development proposals? Two, will you support ending subsidies to the sector? And three, how will you ensure a just transition for oil and gas workers and others affected by a potential economic shift to a low carbon economy?
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. I've made it very clear, and all my colleagues have, we'll support a gradual reduction in oil and gas proposals and any associated subsidies to allow our industry to make the transformation from a hydrocarbon economy to a green economy. We have great potential to develop clean technologies and to assure that transition is viable and in the best interests of the province and its workers. However, we can't devastate families and communities by abruptly undermining their livelihood. And our current Liberal platform includes supports to ensure that transition is fair and supports are available for those that may need it to shift their employment to green energy sources. A re-elected Liberal government will support the transition of workers to a greener economy with our $2 billion Futures Fund, which helps prepare them for the green transition. And transitioning to a green economy based on renewable resources will bring about countless opportunities with so much potential for growth for our province. And the province's many skilled workers are set to take advantage of this transition. For instance, shifting to fully renewable energy resources will require some mineral extraction on a massive scale to supply the materials for batteries, wirings, and other components of solar panels, wind turbines, and zero emission vehicles. This major energy shift will require major efforts by all industries, leading to significant opportunities for jobs and growth. Renegotiation of the Atlantic Accord meant that the province keeps 100% of the funds from this economically crucial resource and hundreds of millions of dollars in support for offshore oil to maintain the resource through COVID-19. However, we know that we need to make the gradual shift from oil dependency to a green economy. But again, we can't devastate families and communities that rely on the oil resources without helping them transition fairly and reasonably. We must be concerned not only with the ecosystem, but with the social system and the well-being of families in the Long Range Mountains. And our commitment, it's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be that we're going to turn off and turn on to the green economy. So it's how do we get there? And our commitment, for example, with electric vehicles, you're going to slowly see people switch over. So we have to make sure that we help communities and families and workers transition to this. And we've committed to do this and we will continue to do it. You know, the $300 million that we came up with for the offshore oil workers to help them in time of need there in COVID, that was again to help them transition out of this industry into the green economy. We've been there for workers and we will continue to be.
There you go. Thank you. Kayla.
Thank you. You know, the single most important thing we can do to solve the climate emergency is to transition away from our reliance on fossil fuels. We must be creative in our approaches, and we must ensure that we're building sustainable green jobs that support workers over the long term. We realize and we agree with Goody that this will be a long-term process. We're fully committed to a fair and just transition for workers that includes full and proportional support measures in any programs and any opportunities. And we must look at alternative energy strategies right away. But when we talk about helping communities and families, we also need to be clear. We need to make corporations pay their fair share. Canadians want to do their part to fight climate change, but they are struggling with the rising cost of living. Last year, we know Trudeau gave almost $2 billion in subsidies to fossil fuel companies and not to workers. So an NDP government would ensure that funding goes to workers. We'll work closely with communities and stakeholders and Indigenous communities to make a fair and equitable plan, and then we will implement it. I think that in order to really transition, there's a lot we can do. We can create good paying jobs by investing in clean energy, by investing in energy efficient, affordable homes and housing. We can promote zero emission vehicles and retrofitting all homes across this country. We have fantastic creativity at our local post-secondary institutions and also from our emerging tech sector. I think it's really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from those communities, from those institutions, from those companies, and bringing those creative ideas to the forefront.
Excellent. Thank you. Our next question, again, is something that we hear a lot about in our province. It's around food security and sustainability. This has increasingly become an important topic across the country and in our province. Changing the way we produce and distribute food has the potential to tackle numerous issues simultaneously, including climate, food justice, pollution prevention, and others. In May of 2019, the federal government released the first ever national food policy for Canada. In recent years, our provincial government has committed to increasing commercial agricultural production in Newfoundland and Labrador in an effort to improve food security. What are some specific ways you and your government would ensure that all efforts to deal with food insecurity and increase food production are implemented following the principles of ecological responsibility, such as regenerative agriculture? Kayla, I'll go to you first.
Thank you. Food security is absolutely a real concern in our region. As I travel around at the doorstep, I'm hearing that the affordability of fresh produce is a real concern, and access to a range of healthy food products. It's a challenge that absolutely needs fixing. as an NDP government, we'll invest in a green economy that includes agriculture and community-based solutions. I think there are a lot of interesting ideas. I do also see when I go across the riding community gardens, land that's being reserved for small-scale agriculture. And really, as your NDP MP, I will be interested in hearing your ideas, working with groups such as the Western Environmental Centre and others, Indigenous communities across the province, on ways that we can strengthen this and ways that we can tackle food insecurity, especially for marginalized communities and remote communities in our province that may not have the same access to the big grocery stores that we might have in places like Cornerbrook.
Okay, excellent. Ms. Goody.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. It's sad that Newfoundland and Labrador produced more of its own food in the 50s and 60s than we do now. Sustainable food production is a huge challenge. Agriculture has serious detrimental impact on natural systems as well. So we've got to develop the industry wisely. More attention to the ecosystem services are required to limit pollution, land degradation, and to reduce pesticide use. And we've got to turn away from maximizing production to reduce our environmental footprint. We've got to focus on more high-value crops to limit land use and think outside the box. Improvement in farming practices and water use is essential. More optimal transportation regimes are also needed to address the climate change issue. But there are some great stories here in the Long Range Mountains. In Black Duck Siding, there's a company called Growing for Life, and it's a hydroponics facility. They're growing tomatoes out of a bamboo shoot all above ground. It's a phenomenal thing to see. And if you go to the grocery store, look for it. Growing for Life. They're delicious. And because they're made right here, you don't have the transportation affect the cost of getting them here. They have a plan to expand their greenhouses and do more and more hydroponically. I've met with other groups that are expanding in hydroponic growing as well, and that can help whether you're in the north or anywhere. It's such a phenomenal system. And we just supported the announcement of a secondary processing facility. Sadly, 99% of the dairy goods we consume here, our yogurt, our cheese, our butter, our ice creams, they're all imported into the province. The carbon footprint alone that we will save instead of trucking these hundreds of thousands of liters of milk off the island and then bringing them back in products, the carbon footprint alone of this facility being built outside Deer Lake is going to be phenomenal. The Canadian Agriculture Program, where we partner with the province to support local producers and getting young people into the industry, and again, encouraging them to think outside the box, has been a huge success. It's oversubscribed, so we've had to put more money into that program. So we're getting there. We just need to think creatively, think innovatively, and frankly, I can't wait till we start to see the first products come out of the secondary processing facility in Deer Lake.
Sounds delicious. For the benefit of our viewers, and we certainly thank you again for joining us this evening, we're coming up to our last question to the candidates, the pre-scripted questions. So we are going to be opening up, when we follow this question, we will be opening up a Q&A section, and you should be able to see that pop up on your screen, or you can click on the More section when it's activated. It's not currently active, but when it is activated, it will give you an opportunity to put in a question to the candidates. You can type in your question into the box. Only our behind the scenes team will see it. And they're going to filter through and look for questions that, again, are respectful, that are on topic, that are possibly introducing a new subject that we haven't addressed with the candidates yet. And we will then provide that opportunity for you, the audience, to engage with our candidates and throw any questions. So I just want to give you that heads up as we come into our last question, because we're going to be asking you to put your thinking caps on and sending in your questions to us momentarily. So our last question this evening, ladies, that we have planned for you here is around threats to the ocean ecosystems. So we know that there are many, many threats, including ocean warming, acidification due to climate change, overfishing, as well as risks from offshore oil production. As a coastal province, we are particularly vulnerable to impacts on our oceans. I think we would all agree with that. Our culture and way of life, as well as our economic sectors, such as fishery and tourism, are also highly dependent on a healthy ocean. Given the risks to our ocean ecosystems, what actions will you take to protect them? So Ms. Goody, you're first.
I knew one of us was going to say you're on mute, right? It was going to be me. Thanks, Carol. Canada has the largest coastline in the world. And here at home, the economy, the Long Range Mountains relies heavily on that ocean, and it has for many, many generations. We here at home are people of the sea. The value of the ocean for our local economies, as you said, Carol, for fishing and tourism is unreal. Our ocean sectors contribute $31.7 billion annually in gross domestic product and, account for close to 300,000 jobs. I contend that Canada's blue economy offers a reasonable way forward. The focus has to be on sustainable ocean management, and it involves a balance of the three P's: protection, production, and prosperity. And our ocean's health is at risk from pollution, especially from plastics and climate change. And we have to address these issues to protect our oceans. So we have a phenomenal program, and we're going to expand it. The Ghost Gear program, which continues to clean up our oceans and coastlines from lost and abandoned fishing gear and ocean plastics that endanger sea life, impact fish stocks, and pollute the ocean. We're going to invest $50 million over the next 5 years if we're reelected to support community shoreline and oceans plastic cleanups. And there are phenomenal projects that have gone on every year. I know Smallcraft Harbors, the Harbor Authority in Port aux Basques the other year won an award, a national award for what they sadly took out of their harbor, but they won a great award for it. And again, the Atlantic Healthy Oceans, based out of Grosse Morin area, does some phenomenal work every year in cleaning up the ocean coastline. Strong action will allow for a viable fishery, for renewable energy, and for reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And building a sustainable ocean economy is one of the greatest opportunities. Historically, as I said, we are ocean people, and I welcome the opportunity to work with local and national partners to address ocean health and ocean wealth. Investing in our oceans can bring this promise tremendous benefits: environmental, ecological, health, economic, and social. The Oceans Protection Plan was launched in 2016, and it's put in place world-leading shipping safety. It's strengthened protections for our coast and marine life. It's included endangered whales, opening and reopening Coast Guard stations to keep people safe. The efforts of your Liberal government involved continuing to work with businesses, academic institutions, provincial and territorial governments, and not-for-profits to position Canada to succeed in the fast-growing global sector of the blue economy. Inshore, offshore processing, and the impact of our local economies is phenomenal. And tourists come to our province for our environment and our ocean, and a healthy ocean will mean a healthy economy because of all these various industries and people working together every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gala.
Thank you. Absolutely. We know there is a crisis. We've had the Intergovernmental Panel on Oceans. We've had this Code Red report that makes it abundantly clear the oceans are warming, they're at risk, and it's affecting our fishing, our fisheries. It will hurt incomes, it will hurt livelihoods for those who depend on fishing and outdoor tourism, as Goody has mentioned. But I think we need to ask the question of our Liberal MP. What has the Liberal government done to ensure that big polluters are actually paying? Why is it up to communities that they have to clean up the shorelines themselves? I think those are the key questions we need to ask and think about a different strategy. The NDP government of the future is committed to working with stakeholders from all sides, from communities, fish harvesters, Indigenous groups, in conversation together to plan for this future, figuring out policies and action plans that actually best meet the needs of all those concerned and ensure that we can have oceans that will sustain us into the future.
Excellent. Thank you. Ms. Goody, you'd like to have a rebuttal on that one?
I'm just going to throw in a little wild card if I can, Miss Carol.
Absolutely.
As I mentioned, Kayla, we've got our Ghost Gear program. We've got over $50 million to help support community shoreline and oceans plastic. So we are doing something. And the other program that we have is our Atlantic Fish Fund. And that was an incredible fund for the Atlantic provinces where the fishery is so important to help fishermen transition into better gear, a safer gear, not only for them personally, but for what they harvest. So it's changing the mindset and the way we fish and doing it in a sustainable, more economical for them and better for the environment for all. So we have done a great deal. And yes, there's more to do, but to say we've done nothing isn't quite right.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. All right, so I'll remind attendees now, those of you that have joined us this evening, if you wish, this is your opportunity to ask a question of our candidates. If you hover over the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A, or it may have the three dots with more, and you may need to click on that, depending on how your setup is. But if you find the Q&A panel, You'll be able to type into a question there, and our committee behind the scenes, are going to be vetting through those and sending me the question, which I will read to the candidates once I have it received. And then we will go from there. So given time, first of all, I do want to thank you as your moderator that you ladies were well on time. And I certainly appreciate that, because I think now it's going to give us an opportunity to hear from some of our viewers that are with us this evening. So I do have one question in. Goody rebutted, so I think I'll go back to you first, Goody. In our district, there is a strong outdoor culture that is heavily focused on ATVs in the summer. These destroy habitat, including beaches and coastlines where birds nest. How are you committed to reducing the damage caused by these vehicles?
And it's not only vehicles, Miss Carol. It's we've got high-speed watercraft in our rivers and waterways as well. And I hate to say this, but regulatory, that's a provincial issue. But we all have got to work together on this. And again, I think it comes back to education. I was a Beaver Cub and Scout leader, a Pathfinder leader, and we had the old pack it in, pack it out mentality that you didn't leave a footprint on the economy in the environment. And we also had you were respectful. I think the province needs to adapt more of what Parks Canada does. There is a ban on ATV use in Parks Canada. There is that corridor in Grossmore National Park where there is that one corridor you're allowed to snowmobile on. I think we need to do education and show people the damage that we're doing by the use of motorized craft, either in the water or on the land. Educate our kids, and we all need to work together to show what the damage this is doing. And it's only going to happen if we all work together. And there needs to be provincial regulations put in place to cut down the use, that they just can't go hither and yon everywhere.
Excellent. Thank you. Kayla, your thoughts?
I don't think anyone would disagree with education. Certainly more education on, the impacts of some of these some of the ATVs and high-speed watercraft, sure. I think looking, absolutely the province can take leadership, but I think the federal government has a role to play as well. Certainly there can be experiences from other jurisdictions and other countries that have been able to regulate, and I think that is something we can look at. And make sure, and I think the other important thing is to make sure we're working with stakeholder groups. So there are a few nascent groups across the region that are, where people who say snowmobile associations. So I think there's an important role to play in consultation when developing policies like that, and thinking about regulation and education programs. Because I think there's some important partners that could be worked with there.
Excellent, thank you. Again, I have a bit of a two-part question coming in, and Kayla, I'll go to you first. Do you believe that there is any potential to develop wind energy in the Bay St. George area? And if so, what would you do if elected or re-elected, so in your case, if elected, to bring a wind energy company here to Western Newfoundland and Labrador?
I think there is a lot of potential here. I mean, certainly trying to keep your lawn signs up in an election with the wind, you can just see the potential there. So I think in order to bring those companies, first, obviously there needs to be a look at what are the environmental impact and where would be good places that would be best situated for wind. So looking at that, working potentially with our post-secondary partners to figure that out, and then making sure that it's clear to companies that we are open for that kind of business. The New Democrats believe in the green new economy, and wind energy and other renewable forms of energy is a key part of that. So working with various stakeholders to do research and to do business development, and then making sure that is known that this is a possibility here is what the first thoughts that come to mind. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Ms. Goody.
Thanks, Carol. As MP, I was fortunate to have many, many meetings on this topic, and the potential for wind, especially in the Bay St. George area, is phenomenal. I know I've had presentations on onshore wind and offshore wind. The problem we have, though, in developing that is the agreement that was done by the previous provincial progressive conservative government that you can't put power back into the grid. So all these have become stymied at a provincial level, that the province needs to address that, of how you put that power back into the grid. That was part of those negotiations that the progressive conservative government did provincially. So I would like to suggest that maybe you take that power and use it as economic generators. Do you use it for, as we spoke earlier, of new potentials, of new businesses? Is there a way that the province can take that? But until they address that one issue, it's going to be difficult to explore this. I know they are speaking about it, and I encourage them to get on with it sooner.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. We do have another question that has come in. What are you going to do to ensure open net salmon farms do not affect and infect local wild salmon fish stocks and pollute the bays with effluent as seen in other parts of our country? Ms. Goody, I'll go to you first.
Thanks so much for that. And some people may know that I'm a passionate Atlantic salmon person too. The reality is aquaculture is a huge job creator. And where's that fine line? And when you look at what areas that are doing aquaculture well, there is land-based that's working well, very well in areas. It's very expensive, but it is much safer and better for the wild salmon rivers. And when you talk, and I've spoken to both sides, the fors and the against, but it's quite clear that you need to have, if there is aquaculture activity, it needs to be far away from a wild salmon river. It needs to be off in an area where the effluent won't have any impact. And again, it's a provincial regulated industry as well, but I encourage municipalities to get involved whenever the conversation comes up in aquaculture in their communities, and stand their ground and say, well, we want to make sure that it's so many miles away from the mouths of wild salmon rivers. We're blessed in Newfoundland and Labrador. If you are a wild Atlantic salmon lover like I am, you've seen how the progression has just the progression of decline has narrowed, and we're in the eye of what's left. So I think we all have to work together to ensure that what we have stays safe, and also from the job point of view, may encourage these businesses. Maybe they can look more at on land farming. And again, stay away. There's a magical number to stay away from wild salmon rivers, and we need to encourage them all with that. So I encourage the province to make legislation to make that happen.
Thank you. Ms. Gala?
Thank you. As Goody mentioned, this is a provincial regulation issue. And I think as MP, what I would do is make sure that knowledge is brought into the community level and at the local level, so that there can be pressure put on to make those changes to regulation. So to sort of facilitate conversations around that about what can be best for communities and different parts of our province. I think the federal government does have a role to play in making sure that stakeholders talk to each other and are working together to find solutions that will work for the various groups. And I'd be committing to learning more about this. Salmon fishing is not an area of expertise of mine. And so I would welcome an opportunity to learn more and to get to know the people who are involved in those sectors in our province.
Excellent. Thank you. I do want to thank our viewers for sending the questions in. I appreciate that. We're doing well on time. So again, if you have any other questions as you're listening to this conversation that you'd like to add, please continue to send those in. And thank you to my team that is sending me the questions. So Ms. Kayla, the next one's coming up to you. Regarding land mass protection, plans for new protected areas are usually for rural areas. How are you committed to protecting land mass in and around urban areas and preventing coastal erosion?
Thank you. Nationally, the NDP is really committed to looking at increasing urban national parks and really focusing on urban areas in terms of the environmental strategy. So taking a cue from that leadership, what I would do is work with local conservation groups in the various communities and urban areas we have around to figure out a plan together of what could work to make sure that we tackle some of the various interconnected issues, including coastal erosion, and work with the provincial and Indigenous groups in our province to make a plan.
Thank you. Ms. Goody?
Thanks, Carol. People may know that it was the Liberal government that established the first urban park, the Rouge National Urban Park. And our plan of establishing 10 more national parks, there are urban parks considered in that too. And also, we have to work with our municipalities and our Indigenous groups, as Kayla said, because it doesn't all have to be federal, but we can all work together to preserve more urban areas. And on Alice's question regarding coastal erosion, We have some phenomenal programs now. Matter of fact, we revamped the coastal mitigation and the disaster mitigation fund because it was so big before. It had to be like a 10 or $20 million project. So now we've revamped that. And what we're encouraging is, instead of waiting for the disaster to happen, as we saw in the storm 2, 3 Januaries ago, when, all of a sudden we had this mild spell and roads washed out and it was terrible everywhere. We need to address these issues. So one of the things we've done, there was some crazy legislation in place that under disaster mitigation funding, if a road washed out and it was a 2-meter culvert, well, you had to put a 2-meter culvert back. And we said, whoa, that was put there 30 years ago. There is this thing called climate change. So now let's all agree that you don't have to put back this 2-meter culvert. Maybe you need a 4-meter culvert, because if the culvert plugged and the road washed out in the first place. So we've worked with the provinces to ensure that legislation changed, that they didn't have to put back what was there. And it's little things like that, by working together with a strong federal provincial relationship too, that we're able to get things done and get things done quickly. As I said, the disaster mitigation fund is there now. The project level has changed, and the communities are eligible to use their gas tax money and other money to help them address this. But we have some serious issues around here, and we have to address them. Climate change is real, coastal erosion is real, and how do we protect these communities and the people that live there? Only by working together.
Well, thank you. Our next question is one of our board members. So obviously somebody very passionate, giving up his time to serve on the Western Environment Center board. So this gentleman's been a member of the board since 2008. I have followed the successive IPCC reports on climate change and its effects. However, speaking for myself alone, through these years, I have always felt that the Canadian population as a whole, and I just lost the rest of it, there we go, could be doing much more to demonstrate that they understand the climate change is a major issue. So if elected, Kayla, or if re-elected Goody as MP, what will you do to help convince Canadians to fully appreciate the severity of this issue, and by extension, to make meaningful changes in their lifestyles and carbon footprint? So Goody, I'll go to you first.
Thanks so much. And Edwin, thanks so much for that very important question. And I think this all goes back to education. And we need to make sure that some of these courses are mandatory. Like, I think we need to put back basic education programs that we've taken away, and make sure that we understand this. Again, as I alluded to earlier, I was a Cub and Scout and leader and adventure leader. And sadly, you don't see those. I know when my son was in the programs, there was 10 or 12 groups just in the West Coast alone. We don't have that anymore. Children got a great education then. We need to make it mandatory in the classrooms to understand that climate change is real. We need to get businesses talking about it, how climate change is affecting their business. We need to get our Indigenous groups talking about how climate change is affecting their way of life and what they do. And people need to realize that every little bit that we do will make a difference. We got to stop pointing fingers. We have incentives in there for businesses, and with the price on pollution, where we're putting up to $170 a megaton, that's forcing businesses to make changes. But we also need to educate, work together from all levels. And we've got to make sure we start addressing this at every single level.
Well, thank you, Ms. Kayla.
Thank you. I agree. I think there is more that can be done for education. I think we really see a lack of funding for small scale grassroots organizations who are trying to do some of this work. Absolutely, we can work through the education system, but also need to make sure that there is funding for those groups that are doing the good work to educate Canadians and to include them directly in programs such as community gardens, such as composting, such as recycling programs, at the local community level, and that there's funding for grassroots initiatives. So for communities to take up new projects, to implement things that don't already exist, especially in our more rural and remote areas in the province. I do think, though, while it's important that Canadians as individuals do their part, it's also really important to make the big polluters pay. And I think we have seen this government give a lot of subsidies to big companies. And I think there needs to be more done to make sure that the ultra-rich Canadians actually pay more on their taxes, so that we can fund some of these programs. That's really a concern, that it's so many Canadians are really struggling to get by. The pandemic has really made that clear. They're struggling to put food on the table. They're struggling with housing. They're struggling with the high and rising costs of education, especially post-secondary education. And so we need to find ways to tax the ultra rich and make them pay their fair share, so that will trickle down, and so that people, the grassroots organizations, the education system has money to pay for some of this, and that polluters are paying their fair share.
All right, thank you. We're going to shift from water to the land. In regards to the forestry industry, what will be done to ensure reforestation and healthy forest growth? Ms. Kayla, you're up first.
Sure. Here's another one where I think we can work with our excellent post-secondary education and post-secondary institutions in Western Newfoundland. I think there's a lot of creative ideas in terms of doing model forests and doing making sure that there's sustainable forest practices. And I think that that's something that we can invest in and really learn from the best practices here in our province, and to spread that to other parts and to learn from other jurisdictions.
Thank you. Ms. Goody?
Thank you, Carol. As you know, we made a commitment to plant billions of trees. And I'm glad somebody brought this up, because somebody asked me this the other day, and I said there weren't millions of seedlings out there. So they have been planted, and I look forward, and I know there's proposals coming through from all kinds of groups. Here I am talking about the scouting industry again, but from them and not-for-profits of many of others of how to get these rolled out. The other thing that's done for forestry industry, for those of you that are in Corner Brook, you may notice that the old mill building across from the Corner Brook Pulp and Paper, we used to be the old headquarters there, the old offices. That's been in the process of being refurbished, and it's going to be a forestry think tank. It's a forestry hub, money from the federal government and the provincial government working with college in the North Atlantic and Grenfell campus, and that's exactly what that's going to be. It's a think tank of how do we turn the forestry industry around, come up with these new thinking outside the box activities, come up with new products that we can do, and it's all based on greening the economy. So I look forward when that gets up and running, and listening and hearing the incredible ideas that come out of that facility when it's finished. I think it's supposed to open next spring, I think.
Excellent. Thank you. Looks like we've got our behind the scenes team is working hard. So again, continue submitting your questions. We've got time for a few more. Next one, we'll go to you, Ms. Goody, first. In the wake of the pandemic, calls from the business sector, especially in the food industries, have included asking government for increased access to the temporary foreign worker program, which is a federally administered program. This program has been shown to expose migrant workers to exploitation and extortion across the country since its inception. How will you ensure migrant workers are protected in the Long Range Mountains as we try to increase food production?
Thanks for that question, Heidi. And there needs to be, it's disgusting that there's exploitation, extortion that has happened with some migrant workers. But I can tell you, there are some phenomenal temporary foreign workers here in the Long Range Mountains. I've met many of them personally. Many of the ones that have been here for a long time have come in families. They're established, and many of them are working in the agriculture sector. The temporary foreign worker program is working. And as we have an aging community, an aging area, especially here in the Long Range Mountains, we need to encourage more and more to come. The province also has its own foreign workers program, and we need to increase our tax base. We need to increase workers contributing to the economy. And years ago, I know my parents, one was a family of 12 and one was a family of 9. We're not having these big families anymore. We need to have more and more people come into part of the workforce, contribute to the economy. And yes, everyone needs to be treated fairly. And most of all the ones that I know of in the Long Range Mountains are working happily here and supporting the agriculture industry.
Thank you. Ms. Gala?
Thank you. Absolutely. Any exploitation that we see is absolutely unacceptable. I myself am a strong proponent of bringing more newcomers to the province, to Canada. I have supported refugee families to move to Canada and know how difficult it can be, especially to find good jobs. I think trying to navigate a system that has a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of red tape in terms of settling here is really challenging. And the migrant worker program has had a lot of struggles. I think we need to look at what is the minimum wage in that sector and what protections are there on workers. The New Democratic Party is committed to fighting for workers, including those who are coming from other countries, and need to make sure that they feel welcome in our communities, that we are really tackling racism and systemic injustices, and so that they can contribute, as Goody said, to strengthening our economy and contributing to its prosperity in the future.
Thank you. Here's a short, simple question for you, Ms. Kayla, but I'm sure it's a complicated answer. How are you committed to reducing single-use plastics in our district?
Great. Well, I think one of the real challenging things about the pandemic I've personally noticed is that, because of the health and safety regulations, we've been, when you go to get a coffee, you have to get a plastic cup, a plastic lid. You can't always use a real mug. And so I think it's been challenging to see some of the good progress we've made as a society to reduce single-use plastics has been compromised by the pandemic. And I'm looking forward to working with community groups, working with business, and working with the province, and then at the federal level, working to figure out ways that we can reduce single-use plastics. It's really great that plastic bags have been banned, but I think the food system overall is really struggles with this issue. So much of the food that we consume comes in small size packaging. I think it's great when we can support local farms and find ways for them to get their produce to market without having to use single-use plastics, finding ways to have reusable bags, reusable paper, other kinds of ways to allow people to bring their own bags to farms, to stores, so there is less of a reliance on single-use plastic. It's really frustrating because, I'm a big believer in fresh fruit and local produce, but sometimes it's challenging when, in order to buy that, and to consume it, you need to have a lot of plastics to get it to us. So I think it's a bigger issue than just us necessarily as consumers that needs to be tackled at the systemic level, looking at our food production system, for example, as one area where we can do better on reducing single-use plastics. There are many others, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Goody, you're nodding your head. Your approach?
I agree with everything Kayla said, and I think we've also got to think outside the box. We've all traveled and seen some incredible stuff made out of plastics, recycled plastics. Why can't we do that at home? We have our Women's Entrepreneurial Fund. We've got all kinds of funds out there to help small businesses get started. It just takes somebody making that first step to recycle things. I've seen furniture made out of plastic, recycled bottles. We've all seen different mats around our house. Look what local fishermen do. There's some retired fishermen down on the South Coast that take their old ropes and make beautiful doormats outside your door. I've got one here at my home. So we need to think outside the box of what we do have and how can we repurpose it. What's that saying? One man's garbage is another man's treasure. Well, let's think outside the box of what we can do. And again, we need to promote and support our local farmers. I know there's a farm just down the road from me, and you can buy your basket of vegetables once a week. There's no plastic there. That's great. They drop off the basket. They pick up the one from the next week. And we need to go back to what we did years ago. I love it when you hear, my parents have both passed, but, I remember stories of the milk bottles outside the door. You went to the grocery store and it was all wrapped in a paper, in paper. It wasn't all the single use. So we need to go back to more of what we did before. I remember my mother always used to chuckle when she'd see us buy dog food. She said, our dogs ate what, was left. So we need to go back to some of this stuff that we did. It's not all. And again, I know it might be easier to say you can do some of this in rural areas, but there's no reason why we can't do it in the cities as well. I know that this individual that I'm thinking of that does the garden baskets, they do deliver to Corner Brook. And, we're seeing the community gardens. We're seeing more communities doing that and sharing. We just need to encourage everybody to do a little more as well.
Well, thank you. I'm just going to throw out to my behind the scene teams just to give me a bit of a time check. I think we may only have time for one more question before we clue up. So I'm going to go out with this question now. So Goody, you'll be up first. This province is already dealing with the impacts of climate change. That's not a surprise. We've been talking about that. And those are predicted to get worse, regardless of how substantial and quickly our greenhouse gas reduction efforts move. We see highway washouts and coastal road erosion, for example, that in some cases might be the only route into a community. And I know just in the Humber Valley, not that long ago, we were blocked off between Corner Brook and Deer Lake, for instance. What is the federal responsibility and your role as an MP, if reelected, to protect infrastructure in municipalities from the impact of climate change?
So that's an interesting question. And thanks so much for that, Glenn. Because the way infrastructure projects work is the municipality submits their project to the province. The province then submits their projects to the federal government, and then it's a cost shared basis. So that's why it's so important to have a working relationship with your municipality. Because if I don't know that a municipality has put in a project to do the Carol Spicer Bridge, if I don't see that on when the list of projects come up from the province, I can't do that. So it's a real partnership in showing how you need to have a great working relationship between provincial, municipal, and federal. Because the only roads that the federal government are responsible for are in the national parks or in if it's a Coast Guard station. So you'll see like that last 10 feet gets paid. So it's only federal infrastructure that does. So you may recall if you've driven up the Northern Peninsula, the bridge that was just rebuilt in Dix Bridge. Parks Canada used a whole new methodology of construction. It was great. Instead of bringing in fill and all this, it was like a unique form of plastic that formed a buttress, and then it was just filled in around and they grassed over it. But it was also interesting to note that Parks Canada now built that bridge something like 5 or 6 meters higher because of climate change. So it's all working together. We do have a disaster mitigation fund, again, that we work with municipalities in the province. So it's a partnership. So again, the federal responsibility is only for the 100% federal roads, which is in Parks Canada. But the role as an MP is to protect the infrastructure, yes, but it's by working with all the municipalities in the province to ensure that we're addressing projects, and the projects that we're doing together as a partnership are the ones that are needed to be done to help these communities that were cut off in that last storm as the impact of climate change.
Well, thank you. Kayla?
Well, I am glad that Goody went first because that was a really helpful explanation of how that works. That is not my area of expertise. So thank you, Goody, for that lesson. I think generally speaking, though, I think the federal government has a role to play in helping to bring that new technology beyond what's just done in national parks and areas under federal jurisdiction to all levels. So to the provinces and to the municipalities. So investing in technology, investing in research, investing in transfer of all that technology and research and technology, and bringing that and thinking about jobs, thinking about how we can create good jobs and how we can support the green new economy and investing in green infrastructure. I would say that in the national parks, I think also areas under the federal jurisdiction, there needs to be greater consultation with communities. I think one thing I always notice when I'm in the national parks is, where are the bike lanes? I'm an avid cyclist. I love cycling in Gros Morne. It's a pretty good place to cycle because generally, people in this region are really friendly. But for me personally, I would like to see bike lanes. I think that's something that, the federal government can play a leadership role. So by building by example, showing by example what can be done and bringing that out to other communities. Certainly we see in places like Stephenville, there are great bike lanes and it's really exciting to see. So I think there's some really neat opportunities for the federal government to play a leadership role. And then as Goody mentioned, working in partnership with the various levels of government to make a difference in people's lives right here.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Kayla. Thank you, everyone who has joined us this evening for submitting your questions. Fantastic questions. And thank you, panelists, for answering those questions. I'm going to give you each an opportunity now to provide some closing remarks. And so, Kayla, I'll go with you first. If you'd like to give sort of your close of this evening, and then I'll wrap up after Goody speaks, and we'll get everyone out on time this evening.
Thank you, Carol. And I've really enjoyed this debate and really the opportunity to connect on these questions has been really great. So thank you. I thought I'd try something a little bit different to close out my remarks. I'm not necessarily that well known in this riding. I grew up here and went away for school and work like so many in my generation and moved back a year ago. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to form deeper roots in the community and learn more about the issues that are facing people in Western Newfoundland. So I'd like to touch on my longtime interest in environmental issues. Some of you may know this who are listening. When I was in elementary school, my family dutifully recycled. We were one of those, individuals can make a difference. But I was really concerned that there was no public pickup of recycling when I was growing up. So when I was 9, I took matters into my own hands and I started a street recycling program on Stewart Street in Corner Brook. One street. I collected cans and bottles from my neighbors. I sorted them in my basement. There are some hilarious photos of me as a 9-year-old sorting cans. My parents are very generous with their basement. And then I donated the proceeds back to local grassroots efforts. So I just want to use that as an example. Throughout my life and now in my career, I have been a fighter for the environment and I am a fighter for rights. That's just who I am. That's what I do. I have marched in the streets for climate justice, and I'm really excited to be part of this conversation in Western Newfoundland right now. So I do think, though, as we all do our part as individuals, but we need government action to take on the big polluters, as I've mentioned, and so that we can live up to our emissions targets. I'm committed to systemic change, and that's why I'm really excited to be launching into this fight. As your MP, I will listen to your concerns, and I'll work with you for real action to address what I consider an environmental apocalypse right now. I do think we've had several years of talk, lots of photo ops. It's time for real action on the commitments that we've made. So often in our riding, we've seen that some benefit while so many struggle. I think it's really important, too, that we have greater, true and meaningful engagement with Indigenous communities. We need true and equal partnership. The NDP is committed to the environment. We're looking at an environmental bill of rights, which would enshrine our commitment to tackling the climate crisis. And Jagmeet Singh has been clear. It's time for the ultra-rich to pay their fair share so that we can build a recovery that benefits everyone. I think we need to fight this climate crisis like we want to win, and I'm in it to win it.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Kayla. Ms. Goody.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll, and thanks to you, Kayla. It's great to hear your story because it does happen one at a time. You know, folks, the world is facing a number of critical environmental issues. We've known that. We've touched on them tonight. The existential threat of climate change, the rapid decline in our biodiversity here in Canada and around the world, also an existential threat on just the human race. The accumulation of pollution in our natural environments, especially plastics and chemicals, it's a serious issue. And our government has taken thoughtful and bold action on all of these issues over the past 6 years. We have the strongest environmental record of any government in our country's history, but clearly there's more that needs to be done. And we're committed to aggressively continuing this work. Our plan is number 1 in the G7 countries. But listen to other credible sources. Here's what people are saying about the plans that have been presented. As a climate scientist and someone with a background in climate policy, I've been impressed by Jonathan Wilkinson, who was then the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, his leadership. The climate plan he recently developed and introduced is bold and thoughtful. It's the only credible plan put forward by any party at the federal level. We're at a critical time. We can't afford to move backwards on climate change. That's Andrew Weaver, the former leader of the Green Party of British Columbia. Mr. Trudeau had a climate plan last week that was just after it was announced that was absolutely marvelous. If they'd ever put that in place, that would actually put Canada on track to respect our Paris Accord obligations. That's Tom McCare, the former NDP leader. And here's what they're saying about the Conservative plan. It's a weaker, more bureaucratical carbon pricing system that shifts money from the poor to the rich. That's from Greenpeace. The Conservatives' plan would have been impressive 10 or 15 years ago, but it's woefully out of touch with climate science today. That's from postdoctoral research fellow Amy Janowitz in UBC. The NDP has a great plan with long as ambition, but it's short on substance and it's economically devastating. And you know, the real question is for the Conservative candidate if she was here. It's a proven fact that if their previous Conservative government had addressed climate change during their years in power, we would be in a better place now. It's great they finally came out from under a rock and agree that there is a climate issue, but we need to make up that time and we all need to work together going forward, and we will make a difference. Thank you so much to WEC for the forum tonight. And again, thanks to you, Carol and Kayla. Can't wait till we can meet in person.
Thank you. Well, folks, for those joining us and for our candidates and for our behind the scenes team, that wraps up our election debate. I want to thank you, candidates, Ms. Goody and Ms. Kayla, for your time tonight. Certainly wonderful to hear from you, and good luck to each of you for the rest of your campaign. My thanks to the Western Environment Center for putting their faith into me, for being your moderator this evening. I had a lot of fun. Ladies, you made my job very easy. Thank you to the behind the scenes crew who did all the organization for this debate, did all the logistics, kept us all on time. I'm looking at my time. We got 2 minutes, so I'm really proud of that we've all been able to do that. And to you, the viewers, those of you that are joining us online and those of you watching on Rogers, thank you for coming out tonight. We certainly couldn't do this without your support and your engagement. We hope that this has been very informative to you. Remember, get out and vote. Advanced voting takes place on September 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th. If you want to vote by mail, which I have already done, you have to apply by next Tuesday, September 14th at 6 p.m. The official election day, as we all know, is Monday, September 20th between 8:30 a.m. and 8:30 p.m. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to visit elections.ca or the Elections Canada office in Corner Brook at 4 Herald Avenue. So with that, folks, thank you once again from the bottom of my heart for bringing me into this. I've really enjoyed it. I wish everyone all the best, and let's protect our environment and work together. And have a great evening, everybody. Thanks so much.